So I've always seen cemeteries as a library of people. Their stories are encapsulated in the time of their history
death.
books are filled with the names of founding fathers. But where are the founding mothers? Hi there, welcome to the Gardens and Graveyards channel. My name is Charisma, and today I thought I'd have a little coffee chat with you about why I choose to honor the first woman burial when I visit cemeteries. I'm here having a little bit of coffee. I'm drinking my Death Wish coffee. It's my favorite coffee brand in the world. It's delicious, it's dark and beautiful. But I put on a sweatshirt this morning. This is my Ghosts of Gettysburg sweatshirt that I picked up in Philadelphia when Spencer and I went there a couple of years ago. And I was thinking about not just the soldiers cemetery, but adjacent to that cemetery, there is a public cemetery that had a beautiful monument to a woman who was in the trenches with the soldiers and with the community and was caring for them and loving them and burying them. And somewhere along the line, the community honored her memory and built a beautiful monument for her. However, that is super rare, and we just don't see women honored very often in cemeteries or in our history books. So that is what started me on honoring the first woman burial. And I wrote some things down, so you're going to see me reference my laptop just because I wanted to really sink you into like the deeper meaning of why I choose to honor the first woman burial. So history books are filled with the names of founding fathers, but where are the founding mothers? I visit the oldest cemeteries and I see the founding fathers' names and the community elder, well, it's the founding fathers and community elders, but they're the male elders honored. And I just don't see the woman being revered in the way that I believe that she should be. And so I am seeking to restore their name and to honor them and their founding role in building these communities. The founding mother of a community would have not just been working at home, doing the cleaning and the cooking and the mending and the sewing and the raising of the children and the making of the babies. She often was a community leader in her own way. She was holding women's circles without calling them women's circles. She was holding, quilting, what are they called? Quilting bees. I think they were called quilting bees. Women getting together and quilting together. Prayer circles. She would have been, part of the community that was not just cooking for her own family, but cooking for the larger community, maybe for her church or for her ranch hands or different things like that. So, or a welcoming community, a welcoming committee for new wagon trains that were arriving. These women did so much more than just work at home. They were really helping their husbands and fathers build communities. In these cemeteries where there's these giant monuments where the names of the deceased are listed and the men of the community are honored with titles like president and founder and captain. Oftentimes, if the woman is honored at all, it's beloved wife of, daughter of. But she has no title of her own. And so often these monuments will tell the story of the husband or the father. Like, it'll say that he was a merchant. It'll tell you, a little bit about who he was in life. But the woman's marker or gravestone often just has her name and her birth and death date. And there's no story. And sometimes you will even find, like, her headstone won't even be beside her husband, but behind her husband's monument, still hidden even in death. So I've always seen cemeteries as a library of people. Their stories are encapsulated in the time of their death and the surrounding deaths around them. You can often tell when there was a pandemic, if there was a fever that ran through. You can tell, like with the first woman burials, oftentimes that's when a community decided to settle down, and they, like one of the leaders of the band, his wife died and he wanted to bury her, and he just decided to stay in that area near her grave. And you will notice this when it's the first woman, and often cemeteries are very often, don't get me wrong, very often founded on a child just dying before a woman. But it kind of just gives you this story of when a woman is buried and then there's a big break in the next burial. It lets you know that that woman was probably on her deathbed when her family arrived in this area. Because if the rest of the community starts dying 10 or 20 years later, it just lets you know this woman was on the trail, especially in America when we're talking about pioneer cemeteries. She was ill and maybe even deceased on the trail before finding her final resting place in the cemetery that we visit. I just wanted to say that when I'm searching for the very first woman burial in a place, her name has often been erased from the books, from stones that have worn down and broken. Sometimes I can't even find her. Sometimes she never had a marker to begin with. And most certainly her story has probably never been told. That her life has not been honored. And in honesty, I believe that she was the backbone of every community that has ever been built. Without her tenacity and her courage and her willingness to go to foreign lands with her family, I don't think that many communities could have been built in the way that they were without the woman founder. But when you start to notice this pattern of women being erased, and you notice how their headstones aren't telling the story, I start to want to investigate deeper. And I know that the erasure of women was done on purpose. That in the 1800s, women had almost no rights. They couldn't own property. They couldn't vote. They didn't have any rights to any money or banking. And oftentimes, she herself was considered property. And she's the one who is doing all of the incredible labor of maintaining the household and making it easy for the founding father to do his job in the public, while her work was extremely private and unrecognized. And that's why I started this mission. I feel that finding the first woman burial isn't just about finding the oldest grave. It's about finding the woman who was here from the beginning. She was the founder too. She saw this town, or whatever town we're in, get built from the ground up. And when she passed, her burial is what made that ground sacred. And her story is the anchor of every community. The erasure of women didn't start in the 1800s. It started long before that. And many ancient cultures revered female deities and powerful priestesses like the Great Mother Earth and the Oracle of Delphi. And the feminine was seen as the connection to the divine wisdom. But with the rise of patriarchal religions, these powerful female figures were systematically suppressed and demonized oftentimes. Goddesses who were creators and protectors who were honored for a millennia and more were suddenly recast as subordinate wives and daughters, if they weren't just completely erased entirely. And this was a way for the new social reform to take hold, where only men held all the power and all of the public authority. And that is why I find it so compelling to find the first woman burial in every cemetery that I visit and honor her. Because really, these women were the women who were caring for the sick. They were the priestesses. They were the herbalists and the midwives. They just couldn't have those titles because they would be accused of witchcraft. And so they took care of their community in these very sacred ways without taking any kind of recognition. These women would have prepared their deceased, just like the priestesses, just like the scent priestesses and the mirafores. They would have been the people preparing the deceased, anointing the body, washing the body, shrouding the body, praying over the body. And this is why we see such a prolific amount of mourning women in our cemetery statuary. Because the keening woman, the mourning woman, was an essential part of our grief process in days past. Today, we don't see that as often. Today, a much more male-dominant mindset of how we grieve has dominated the death care industry. Once funeral homes started being built and cemeteries started being established, and women began to vote and partake in owning their own businesses, suddenly the male model was how we all started to behave. And the male model says we have to be strong and we can't show our emotions. And I see this time and time again in my own personal walk with grief and my personal walk as a graveyard manager. I see women who are attempting to be who are the pillars of their community and their households, taking on the role of being stoic in their grief, when in days past, the women were honored and revered and looked to for permission to grieve out loud, to express their grief and express their rage and express their curiosity and their fears and their deep, deep sadness. And when the women at the graveside would start mourning out loud or dancing about, it gave everyone permission to express their grief, the men and the children and the elders. It was their cue to allow the tears to flow. And it's such an incredibly important piece of our grieving process that we have lost in this modern age. And it is one of my missions to bring that level of grieving back to surface, into safety, and into women's circles. I digress. Let's go back to the first women burial. How do I even find her? If her story has been erased, how do I find her? Find a Grave has been amazing because people have already done phenomenal work in just finding the timelines of burials. So you go to Find a Grave, search for your cemetery, and you can sort the search by oldest death date, which is what I like to do. And then I just scroll through and I try to find the first woman who was buried. It's often multiple children before I find the first woman. And I define a woman 18 and older just because that's our Americanized version. Now, I realize that some of the oldest graves that we have in America, those women would have been already bearing children at 14 and 15 and 16 years old. That was common. But I like to define them a little bit older to kind of bridge the ancient to the modern, right? Because today we really acknowledge 18 to 21-year-olds as being adults. So I look for her birth and death date, or her birth and death date to determine how old she was. And then I start doing Google searches, newspaper searches, at this point in time, because time and money, I do not travel to a city and spend a week looking at their newspaper archives. So much of it is online that I'm able to access it. If I could get into old libraries and record books, that is such my jam. When I was working at my cemetery, the cemetery that I used to work for, we had old documents, handwritten journals of burials, and it was just like, oh, it just filled my heart up. I just love that kind of stuff. But I do not work with any ancient documents at this point in time. But I do Google search, I do Find a Grave, I'll do Ancestry, and what is the other one? A Billion Graves. All of those are fantastic sources to start your search and do a little preliminary research on your first woman burial if you can find anything at all. Now, finding the name and maybe the story is one thing, but finding the actual grave is a whole new challenge. Because you have to get on the grounds and you have to walk row by row. And some cemeteries are really great at GPS, which is a whole new thing that's happened in the last 10-ish years, where people are dropping pins at graves so that we can just get a walking map directly to where we want to go. But that isn't the case in many cemeteries, especially the small pioneer cemeteries that I like to visit. And some cemeteries are really good about putting up a map somewhere in their visitor hut or visitor center area, and it tells you how to read their cemetery plots so you can figure out where she might be buried. But most of the time, that kind of information is not available. And so you're just walking row by row, and you're looking for family names, you're looking for dates around her death date to see. Sometimes they're buried in relatively close together, but not always. And to be honest, being in this world and being very intuitive, I often just find her. Like, I just set an intention to find her, and I do. And oftentimes she's not anywhere where you expect her to be. And Spencer, my husband, is really good at just like knowing where a cemetery is. We won't be looking for a particular cemetery, but we will be like, hey, we don't have anything going on, or we have some time in between events. Let's go look for a cemetery to walk around. And he's really good at just kind of intuitively knowing, like, go down this street and we'll probably find a cemetery. And oftentimes, I would say like 90% of the time, he's right. So when you start just kind of tuning in energetically to these things, I think they just kind of show up. I will often leave a small stone or a flower or a bouquet at her graveside to honor her. And not only honor her, but to bring attention to other visitors that she existed and that she lived in this community and she deserves to be honored. And it's just a simple way to remember. And I guarantee you that there is history behind the first woman that was buried in your community. And I'm encouraging each and every one of you to go to your local cemetery, to find your first woman burial, to honor her life and her existence, and to find her story. And if you do that, I would love it so much if you would put her story, the forgotten story, in the comments below this video so that we can all see, hear, read, and feel how deeply important the role of the woman has always been and still is today. Let's fill this space with their names and their stories and keep them alive in our hearts. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey and being a part of this community. I hope that in the near future, we will be adding a lot more cemetery-related content into this channel. Not just walking tours, but death care. I would love to be interviewing death care professionals and bring that information to all of you. Whether it's about how the body is treated after death, how the families are honored in grief, how we can honor one another in grief, all of those things that are related to the very vast subject of death. Please subscribe so you don't miss any of this new content or any of the first women burials that we might find in future videos. And until the next video, please celebrate your life. And I'll see you next time.